Hello, and welcome back to Present Truth Ministries. We are continuing to discuss the 11 characteristics of the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 and how it identifies the papacy as this little horn. So let's pick back up with the first characteristic. The little horn arises from the fourth beast, Daniel 7:8. The fourth beast, as we saw, represents Rome. So the little horn must be a Roman power. The papacy is Roman in all its dimensions. The clay in the feet of the image of Daniel 2 represents the church. But notice that the feet also have the iron of the legs. This must mean that the religious system which succeeds the Roman Empire will continue to be Roman. Now in Daniel chapter 2, we will notice that there is a great image in chapter 2 that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. And the head was of fine gold, which represented Babylon. The chest was of silver, the belly of and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron. And all of these represented the same kingdoms in Daniel chapter 7: Babylon, Media Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then as we move down into the power that came out of Rome, the papacy, which is a church. So in Daniel chapter 2, the iron and clay mixed in the feet is just a different stage of Rome. The iron is still Rome, but now it's in the feet. Being in the feet, it is identifying it as just another stage of the Roman power. The clay and the iron mixed together means that there is an amalgamation or mixing of churchcraft and statecraft. So what we have here, we are seeing a state and church religious system. A religio-political system will be a better way to phrase it. The religion of the Roman Catholic papacy was inherited from Rome. It is well known that Constantine the Great brought all sorts of pagan practices into the church. This is recognized by both secular and church historians. Historians and theologians consistently emphasize that Papal Rome inherited and perpetuated the Roman Empire, but in a different way. Like I said, it was a religious political system. Number 2, the second characteristic. The little horn arises among the 10. In this image, there were 10 horns, and the little horn arose among the 10 horns. The 10 horns represented the 10 barbarian tribes that had split up in the Roman Empire. And the little horn arose after these 10 horns. The 10 horns are, the 10 divisions of the Western Empire. So the little horn must arise in Western Europe. Notice that, again, these first two characteristics restrict the geographical location of the little horn to Western Europe. The Roman Catholic Church did rise among the 10 kingdoms into which the Roman Empire was divided. So what we're doing is we're identifying the little horn And we're seeing how the Roman Catholic papacy fits the description of Bible prophecy as the little horn. And we are continuing to use the historical flow method, meaning that we're just following the events of secular history as they unfold and seeing how they pertain to the message that God has for us in his word that he's given through the prophet Daniel. Number 3, the third characteristic. The little horn arises after the 10. So not only did the little horn arise amongst the 10, the little horn also arose after the 10. According to historians, the 10 horns were complete in 476 AD. So this must mean that the little horn was to arise to power sometime after 476 AD. So now we are able to locate where we are in history. And this is important to know as we identify the power of the little horn. The papal power could not exercise absolute sovereignty until the 10 kingdoms were subjected to its control. When Alexander, king of the Heruli, disposed Romulus Augustus in 476 AD, the fragmentation of the Roman Empire was complete. Yet even though the 10 divisions of the Roman Empire were complete by 476 AD, there were 3 who were rebellious and refused to submit to the Bishop of Rome. These were the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. These 3 had to be removed in order for the papacy to exercise complete control. Our fourth characteristic. The little horn was to pluck up 3 of the first 10 horns by its root, Daniel 7:8. This means that these 3 nations will be uprooted from history. Read Daniel chapter 7, verse 20 and 21. And Daniel 7:24 tells us that the little horn would subdue 3 horns. 3 of the first 10 nations would disappear from history. As a matter of fact, the papacy did uproot 3 of the 10 kingdoms. 7 of the 10 barbarian kingdoms were converted to Christianity and submitted to the authority of the Bishop of Rome. However, 3 of the kingdoms converted to Christianity but embraced heretical teachings of Arius. Arius was a Presbyterian in Alexander around the year 320 AD who taught that Christ was created out of nothing as the first and greatest of all creatures. And this is what these 3 nations embraced. The teachings of Arius were condemned in 2 great councils, Nicaea in 325 AD and Constantinople in 381 AD. These 3 Arian kingdoms were a threat to the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome, who was later called the Pope. These 3 kingdoms were eventually uprooted by the imperial power acting under the influence of the Bishop of Rome. The Ostrogoths defeated the Heruli in 493 AD. The Vandals were crushed in 534 AD, and they were crushed by Belisarius, the general of Emperor Justinian's army. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, implored Justinian to uproot the Ostrogoths, and this happened in February 538 AD. It is of great significance that in 533 AD, Justinian proclaimed a decree which recognized the Pope's headship over all the churches. Actually, a letter written by him to the Pope included in the Code of Justinian a collection of Justinian laws, was the standard law over all Europe for over 1,000 years until the late 1700s, replaced by the Code of Napoleon. The significance of this decree is that the Roman emperor was legitimizing the spiritual authority of the Pope. The state was using its clout to proclaim that only the Pope was the authentic spokesman for Orthodox Christianity. It was not fully implemented till 538 AD. Our fifth characteristics. The little horn was to speak great words against the Most High. Daniel 7:21 and 25. Revelation 13:5 explains what these words would be, namely blasphemy. And what is blasphemy according to the Bible? It is when a merely human power proclaims to be God on earth, and when it thinks it can exercise the prerogatives and functions of God. See John 10:30 and through 33 and Mark 2:7. The Roman Catholic papacy does claim to have the right and authority to exercise the prerogatives and power of God. The Bible is clear that the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 3 through 4. Pope Leo III, in an encyclical letter, June 20th, 1894, said, "We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty." The Roman Catholic Encyclopedia says, "The Pope is of so great a dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God and the vicar of God." The Pope also claims the right to be called Holy Father. Jesus warned the Jewish leaders of his day to call no man your father. Read Matthew 23, verse 9. The Pope allows people to approach him, bow before him, and kiss his ring. People bow before the Pope and kiss his ring. Read Acts 10, 25 through 26. It explains that Peter refused to allow Cornelius to bow before him. And supposedly Peter, as tradition likes to proclaim, was the first pope. But we know that that's not exactly true. Jesus demonstrated what the humility that leaders are supposed to possess. He washed his feet of his disciples. He didn't have people kissing his hands and doing other things to honor him. He showed that people in position are supposed to have a certain level of humility. But the Pope has encouraged people to bow before him and kiss his feet. The papacy claims to possess the power to forgive sins, including the priesthood. According to the Bible, only God can forgive sins. Read Mark 2:7. If only God can forgive sins, and the Pope claims to have the power to forgive them, then the Pope must claim to be God. And the Roman Catholic papacy claims to have changed the law of God. Not even God can change the law he wrote with his own finger. Read Exodus 31, verse 1. The law is as eternal as God is. God wrote the law for the well-being and happiness and protection of all the universe and all created beings. The law is perfect. If God is perfect, how can he make a mistake? God doesn't need to change his law and can't change his law because it's perfect. The Bible is trying to warn us, if that's the case, how can a mere man change a divine command or a divine law that God has put in place? The Bible is trying to warn us of some very important things. This means that the papacy not only claims powers that are equal to God's, but actually claims a power which is greater than God's. This is blasphemy in its most odious form. The sixth characteristic. The little horn was to be a persecuting power against God's people. This is stated in Daniel 7:21 and repeated in verse 25. The Roman Catholic papacy has been an ardent persecutor of the sinners throughout our history. Roman Catholic authorities frequently employ two passages to defend the view that it has a right to use the sword to preserve the integrity of the faith. And they use Matthew chapter 10, verse 34 through 37, Matthew 16, 16 through 18. They take these scriptures out of context to use that they have this type of authority to persecute. Matthew 10, 34 through 37, Jesus says that he came not to bring peace, but a sword. The text showing that the sword is not to be used by believers against unbelievers, but rather by unbelievers against believers. Many Catholic authorities employ this to justify the church's use of the sword to punish dissenters. The keys in the second passage are interpreted as the right to exercise spiritual power and temporal power. In other words, the church not only has the right to rule in spiritual matters, but also in civil matters. They use the second part of that verse where Jesus said he gives us the keys of the kingdom. They interpret that to be that they can exercise their authority in civil matters as well, combining the influence of church upon the state. And according to the Roman Catholic theology, this gives the church the right to employ civil power to punish those who dissent from its theology. The seventh characteristic. The little horn would think to change times, that is to say, God's timetable of prophetic events. So God showed Daniel that this power, this little horn power, which we are identifying as the Roman Catholic papacy, would have the audacity to go to his word and change prophetic events that God said would unfold in a certain way and change them, and has deceived millions in the process. The little horn invented false systems of prophetic interpretation to rival historicism. And if you study the background of historicism Historicism was the founding governing principle that the reformers used to identify the symbols in Bible prophecy. In Revelation and in the book of Daniel, they used the historical flow method. And as Protestant believers today, we are supposed to, following the reformers, continue to follow and understand how the historical flow method has made us who we are, distinct from Catholicism. But many Protestants don't follow historicism or the historical flow method. They follow these rival prophetic interpretation systems that have been implemented by the Roman Catholic Church. And that's why there is this difference in views about Bible prophecy and what symbols represent who. So this is to say, it will seek to supplant God's prophetic scenario and replace it with its own. At this point, we are going to dive into Daniel and take a closer look at chapter 7, verse 25. Changing the times and the law. Now, the central verse that we're going to focus on in Daniel 7:25 is this work of the little horn, the Antichrist. As it is described, the scripture says, he, the little horn, shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and intend to change times. Aramaic, the Aramaic word there is zeman, and law. Then the saint shall be given into his hand for a time. The Aramaic word for time there is idan. And times, idan, in half a time, idan. So we have two Aramaic words for the word time in Daniel 7:25. The first Aramaic word is called zeman, and it is used for time. The second Aramaic word is called idan. So Daniel 27:25 contains a prediction given over 2,500 years ago of the rise of the particular futuristic hermeneutic. So in Daniel 25, what we see happening is God is showing us that hermeneutic, which means the method of interpretation, it will be changed. It will be changed from historicism to a different method, which a lot of people interpret now using a method called futurism. Our study will focus particularly on two malefic acts of the little horn, namely the change in the times and in the law. We will explore a different way of looking at the change in the times of Daniel 7:25. Unwarranted changes in God's prophetic calendar have led dispensationalists to wrongly divide the word of truth and to offer private interpretations that hide the great events that are predicted in the sure word of prophecy. So the objectives of this study is to provide an extensive biblical analysis of the words times and time as they are employed in prophetic context of Scripture. We will examine the prophetic hermeneutic that was used by the Protestant reformers from the 12th to the middle of the 18th centuries. We'll point out how the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation shifted the prophetic hermeneutic of Protestantism from historicism to futurism and preterism. We'll document how Roman Catholicism, futurist, and preterist prophetic hermeneutic invaded and conquered Protestantism. We will demonstrate the devastating implications of a futurist and preterist prophetic hermeneutic to Seventh-day Adventist eschatology. We will provide a few examples of dispensationalist predictions that have failed to materialize. So stay tuned, and we'll follow up with this study of identifying the little horn as we dig into the meat of the word to gain a better understanding of Bible prophecy.